In this lesson, we're going to learn how to work with frames. I've already got a scene set up here with 4 different layers, and within those layers I've got one layer that just has a static graphic, the hill, 2 layers that have motion tweens, and 1 layer that has a shape tween. And I'm just going to talk about how to copy and paste frames in those different types. We'll start off with the hill, which is the simplest, I guess, and it's just a straight shape graphic here. Now to copy a frame, I can just click on any frame in the timeline. Doesn't even need to be a keyframe, just any frame. Right click on it and just go down until I see copy frames. And then I can paste that anywhere in that same layer. Let me go back to another frame and just go right click, paste frames. Now you didn't see a whole lot of change on the screen because it was pasting something that was already there. However, you will see in the timeline that it actually generates a keyframe when I do the paste. So I'm just going to undo that. And with it still in my pasteboard, I'm going to go to the end here and just show you what happens when I attempt to paste in a frame that has no current keyframes or span frames in it. If I highlight frame 95 here, right click and go paste frames, it does paste it, but it will span out the previous set of frames. So the way I would deal with that is I would actually create a blank keyframe. Let me demonstrate here. I'm going to undo. I'd create a blank keyframe here. Insert blank keyframe. And then span it out the distance that I want to go to. So I'll go to frame 94. Hit F5 on my keyboard to span that out. And I'll make frame 96 the target now for my paste. So highlight frame 96, right click, paste frames. And that way I can maintain that gap that I had intended without bringing in the spanned frame from the previous keyframe. So let me just undo those. Okay, so that's how I deal with a frame that is not tweened. Let me go down to the shape tween. It's this greenish area here that you can see. And that's basically a square graphic that changes color over time. You can see it goes from blue to yellow and then back to blue. Again, with a shape tween, I can choose any frame. Let's say I go towards the end of this first half. Click a frame, highlight it, then right click, copy frames, and it's virtually yellow at this point. Let me go back here, move my playhead back, and then again highlight a frame here, right click it, and choose paste frames, and I'll show you what happens here. Paste frames. And it does paste the frame in, but it pastes it in as a keyframe, as you can see. And it just inserts it in. So let me undo that. Now let me copy a keyframe, because really what I did there, it might not have been obvious, but even though I clicked over here, in essence it was copying the keyframe. Let me just try that again. Highlight over here, highlight frame, copy frames, come way back to the beginning, highlight frame, edit, paste frames. And you can see again that it's still blue. So if I undo this, I'll just show you what happens if I copy the keyframe. So let me go over to the keyframe, which is where it is yellow. Highlight it, right click, copy frames. Now if I go back to the beginning over here, I should expect it to carry that yellow because that information was contained in the keyframe. So highlight a frame, right click, paste frames, and there you have it. So if I scroll back now, it will do that sudden jump all of a sudden to the yellow. So yes, it's possible to copy frames in shape tweens, but in essence you really are just copying the previous keyframe, and then it does paste it as a keyframe. I'm going to click undo again Control Z a couple of times till I get back to where I started. So that's the keyframes on pasting, copying frames on a shape tween. Let me go to the end of that as well though and show you again. I'll go back and copy that yellow keyframe, highlight, right click, copy frames. And again, if we go to an area that has no frames in it, if I just select a frame, frame 100, right click, paste frames, it spans out. So in other words, I can expect this to go from the blue to the yellow again. And that is what's happening. Now none of these other frames are spanned out, and that's why I only see that element. So in essence, when you paste, you are generating a new keyframe. And if I didn't want to have that gradation, if you will, that morphing effect, I would have to create an empty keyframe and span it out. So I'll undo this a couple of times. There we are. So again, if I didn't want that tweening to occur, I would have to insert a blank keyframe right here. Right click, insert blank keyframe, span that out, in this case to frame 99, highlight it, hit F5, and then go to frame 100, right click, paste frames. And then it suddenly appears there, but it doesn't appear here because it is not associated with this keyframe because I have a blank keyframe here. So there's nothing for it to transition from. Okay, so that's how we paste a new keyframe in a new frame when we're dealing with the shape tween. Now I could also have just gone in here and removed the tween, but nonetheless, this is what will happen. So I'm just going to undo that again. There we go, back to where I started. And now let's address the motion tween. Again, motion tweens have a keyframe, and then they have property keyframes, which are these little diamonds. So let's say I want to highlight a frame. Now with the motion tween, you may remember, to highlight a single frame, I have to control click on the PC or command click on the Mac. Because if I just click on it, it highlights the whole span. So let me just try that with my control key down on the PC. And you can see there the single frame gets highlighted. Take note of where the wheel is on the path. I will right click, copy frames. And if I want to paste that in anywhere else, again, I do need to highlight the frame with the control click, then right click, paste frames. And you can see that it has retained that position. However, it has created a new keyframe, and the span before it will end wherever that ended at that frame. So there's a jump here all of a sudden. And it no longer has the property keyframe at the end. So I've basically blown away my motion path by doing this. So let me try this again, but this time I will copy a property keyframe. So I'll undo a couple of steps here, back to where I was. Let me go back to my property keyframe. Again, control click on the property keyframe, right click, copy frames. Come back to another frame, I'll say frame 50 here, control click, right click, paste frames. And again, it has pasted it as a keyframe, and there is no longer an associated property keyframe as a second keyframe, if you will. And you can also see that my motion path got cut wherever it happened to be on frame 50. Now the only difference in frame 50 is that it remembered its position from the spot where I'd copied it from. But it no longer has that motion path as I described. So you need to be quite careful, especially if there's a motion path involved when copying and pasting on a motion tween. Now let me just undo this again to where it was and talk about moving frames on the timeline. I believe we've covered this previously, but I'll just do a quick review. Now, actually, before I do that, let's talk about copying the whole span of these keyframes. I'll start with the motion tween. If If I click it once, you can see that it's highlighted the whole thing. So I'm just going to go right click, copy frames, and I'll just go to the next frame after, frame 86, highlight it, edit, or rather right click, paste frames, and it did copy the whole animation. So if I start scrubbing across here, there's no background anymore, but it retained that whole animated section, the motion tween, including the motion guide or the motion path. Okay, let me undo that. Now if I want to do the same thing with a shape tween, now to select the whole tween of a shape tween, I can click once on the first frame I want to get, and then carefully scroll across here and shift click on the last frame. You can see that's all highlighted. Then right click, copy frames, and go to the frame I want to paste this tween back into. So I'll just go to frame 86, right click, paste frames. And again, there's my whole shape tween copied and pasted. So I'm just going to undo that as well. And when it comes to just static graphics that aren't tweened, again, click, shift click, same idea, right click, copy frames, and then again, click on the keyframe I want to paste it in, or rather just the frame I want to paste it in, right click, paste frames, and again, it spans out exactly like the original. So once again, I'm just going to undo, bring me back to my original file here. Now let's talk about moving keyframes around. It's basically a two-step process. First step is to click on the keyframe and then click and drag. So if I go into this motion tween, I actually need to control click on it in the motion tween. So control click and then click and drag, and it moves it. Now what it does do is it fills in the area that I moved from with a blank keyframe, because you can't have nothing basically in a prior keyframe. You need to have a keyframe even though it spans out and even though it's empty. Okay, so let me undo that again. Just review that. So control click keyframes in motion tweens, and then click and drag. Okay, so let me undo that once again. With respect to a static frame, a keyframe that doesn't have a tween attached to it, click once, then click again and drag. Similarly, it fills in the empty space with a blank keyframe that spans out. And pretty well the same thing for a shape tween. Highlight the keyframe, then click and drag. Oh, let me just try that again. Highlight the keyframe, click and drag. Again, same result. Let me just undo that again. And if I want to move a whole span, again, I can click once on the keyframe, and I'm talking about shape tween right now. Then shift click on the next keyframe, and again, just drag it. And what it does is it spans out any previous keyframe, but it does move the whole section that I had grabbed and dragged. So again, I will undo that. And we'll try that on the motion tween. With the motion tween, I just have to click on it once to highlight the whole tween, and then just grab it, and you can see a ghost of it moving along, and it moves it and again fills in the area before with a blank keyframe spanning out. So short story is, to move keyframes, regardless if it's a motion tween, shape tween, or just a keyframe with no tweens, you click it once to highlight, then you drag it. And in essence, that's how we manipulate frames on the timeline.